other bullet point I had was guest protocol. This is a fun one because Alli has been on both ends of this conundrum.
Oh, yeah. And I love both ends of this conundrum. I love both ends of it. Guest protocol. Explain.
Some people have significant others. Some people invite significant others to band practices. Even beyond significant others, just friends at band practices, outside forces at band practices. One thing to keep in mind is that we act based on other people's perception of us. When you're in isolation, this is something that's more subconscious. But if you're in band practice and you're trying to be either professionally serious or artistically vulnerable, having other people there is going to radically change the dynamic. Doesn't matter how close you are, doesn't matter how connected you are. If you're connected to a certain point, having this person there is going to prevent you from connecting with your band. And these are all things that, most famous example, the Beatles. I'm not saying Yoko Ono broke up the Beatles. I think that's a kind of lame take. It ignores a lot of personal issues. But, I watched the semi-recent Peter Jackson documentary. And you can see, John was not locked in with the band because he felt the presence of the other. And this was an other that he trusted more than his band. And it created this kind of wall. And he couldn't fully lean into them. They couldn't fully lean into him.
And especially the band doesn't fully trust that other person as much because she wasn't there for all of their, build up and everything. So it's not the same connection.
Well, she also inflicted a lot of her own artistic opinions on the band, too, right? She wasn't separate as a significant other just watching. She was, very highly critical of John and his art and his contributions as well as all of the band's.
Yeah. And the whole, again, if you now have another voice where one person is listening to, but the rest of the band isn't listening to, that's just a form of disconnect. So, that's a lot of the guest policy and other person policy. How clear do you need to make it to them that they're not part of the band and their input is not welcome? You are simply here existing. But then even with that, there's what you were saying about you act differently. You might not throw out a random dick joke if your girlfriend's in the room for funsies. Or you might, I don't know, but...
You better.
Yeah, that's something that you should definitely be pretty... you should be pretty baseline all the way through, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a partner that can appreciate your humor, come on, right?
Then that just doesn't work. But
right, yeah. This is one of the things that I learned... Not necessarily the hard way. Things weren't necessarily the way that I wanted them to be ever at the point when I was in this band. And the band that I had was formed through the college. And so there was a whole bunch of elements of just disconnect between the band members already. We performed really well together when we were supervised by somebody else, right? And so then forming a band together, it was also still easy. We had somebody telling us where to perform and what the protocol was and what kind of venue it was. And so we had a set list that we would adjust accordingly, right? So we'd play weddings, we'd play Christmas parties, shit like that. And we were definitely a college-funded band that would go and do things that our professor wanted us to do. That left us without direction when COVID hit. And, of course, the college affairs were shut down. And there was a couple of different conflicts of interests, right? There was, first of all, a couple of people in the band started dating. That makes the whole guest policy thing really fucking weird, right? And then there was also the issue that I had a super-duper overbearing partner that really, really wanted to be in every single room that I was going to be with somebody of the opposite sex in. And so that, in and of itself, created a lot of tension in the band. And these were boundaries, of course, that I would wanted to set at the time, but all sorts of things distracted me from that. And so now I firmly hold the belief that in order to do something well, you have to put yourself into it. And you have to surround yourself with partners that are going to also see how much you value something, right? You shouldn't have a partner that feels like they have to be involved in every single band thing. You shouldn't have a partner that doesn't recognize that a band is separate from your relationship with them. right? That means don't half-ass the relationship either, right? If you're going to have a partner, you should also put yourself fully into that. But to still be able to...
Separation of church and state.
Right. You have to separate the affairs. And when they do come together, like you said, having it being approved on by everybody else in the band, right? Your relationship isn't just your relationship as soon as you bring it into band affairs either. It's stuff that everybody has to co-sign on, right?
And everybody has to be comfy with each other. Like,
right. And that's like any guest too. Like, that's not just significant others. Significant others are the like primary example because they are going to affect you more. They are going to affect your stage presence the most over anybody else.
This is why it's important to be explicit both with your partner and with your band. Like, these are my expectations. This is how I see my relationship. This is how I see my relationship with the band. This is how they interact. And we're going to set this set of boundaries. And there's a variety of ways you can approach this. Anything's valid as long as everyone's on the same page and as long as nobody's afraid to speak up when their needs aren't being met.
and as long as people are willing to accept when they're told that somebody's needs aren't being met. That's the big one. You can hear your band say, hey, your significant other's being a problem. Like, this isn't working out for the rest of us. But if you don't listen to that and just think, oh, they just don't like her, like, because I'm happy or something, like, then that doesn't work. No.
Why are you in a band with these people who don't like your happiness?
Yeah. No. Your
Right.
happiness is interfering with their job at that moment.
Right. But on both ends, though, you also have to be careful that you're not assigning responsibility to a situation that isn't inherently responsible, right? Because there's also that sort of like catch-22 where it's like, we're going to say that like the significant other of somebody or the friend of somebody is the issue when it's really just that they're not able to engage. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we can like say, okay, well, we're not going to have significant others and we're not going to have friends. We're not going to have guests. First of all, that sort of shoots everybody else in the foot because inevitably you're going to have a situation where you want guests, which you guys have found a good way to work around that. You have certain open rehearsals or you have certain rules and limitations. Not allowed upstairs when there's band practice, right? There's ways that you guys work around it. But, you know, I've seen other people in situations, they have this one just particularly problematic person who will always dote on their significant other the entire time they're in the presence. It just doesn't stop. There's no band engagement. And it's not anything that the significant other's doing. It's literally just that one person can't fucking stay centered. And what I've seen is that this person, like, the band runs into this issue more times than just within that dynamic. If somebody has a hard time staying engaged, then that's going to be an issue that's present usually in more different ways than just within the context of them bringing a partner over or them having a friend, right?
Yeah. It's the same type personality that like would flirt with the bartender instead of loading gear in or be like chatting with people at a show instead of bringing gear in.
Yeah.
He's always in their gear.
These homies bring it.
Fucking vocalists.
For every band, bring your gear into the venue. Don't expect somebody else to carry it.
Something very fundamental about any interpersonal relationship is humor. This is for several reasons. And I mean, the nature of humor is incredibly complicated. This deserves its own episode. But one of the phenomenon I see, because I am autistic, and so I need to study how people interact in order to figure out how I'm supposed to engage with the world. If something funny happens, you're going to make eye contact with whoever you feel closest to. That's just the nature of comedic interactions in social groups. Sort of a warning sign is a band is doing their thing, they're in band practice, something funny happens, and you're looking outside this group for this close connection.
See the external person. Yeah.
Yeah, you have the same reaction I do to this situation, which means we've got this cohesion. And this is the basis of social groups. I mean, this is the function of memes. Memes are in jokes. That's why they're the most pervasive form of humor on the internet, is because the viral nature of the internet allows us to form in groups with people we wouldn't have any sort of like personal identity with otherwise. I don't know. This is what I want to bring to the table is just the question, like, what does this mean? The nature of humor and eye contact.
I love that you asked that question. That's such a you question to ask, first of all. That's so you.
Well, so I've caught myself doing that before when it comes to like Jane being around during practices or hanging out with people. And yeah, that is a case of you as a person need to remind yourself like what your focus in that moment is. Like, because it's also, let's say you have band practice once a week and you see your significant other multiple times a week. Why aren't you searching for this deeper connection with your band specifically? Because like, yeah, you can hear jokes and funny things happen and like do that with your significant other way more often. If something happens, you want to like get that connection with your peoples that you don't get a chance to have as often. I count it more as the people have lives, you have limited time to hang out, all this stuff. Are you actively focusing on prioritizing your time together in like a stressful music situation to have a fun moment? Or are you letting external things carry you into it? That's like your habit of looking at this specific person during a thing. Because yeah, I have to remind myself, no, I can have funny moments with Jane often. But if like something happens in band practice or it happens when other people are around, I need to remember who that night I'm there specifically for and then correct myself. Like, it's not like the end of the world if you do, but it's like, just check yourself on occasion. Don't beat yourself up about it, but just remember, yes, let me see these people's reactions because I don't get to see them as often with this kind of thing.
Right.
Unless you're like Hermaeus and live together, then that's very different.
Yeah, that actually prompts me to ask also, like, what particular threat that scenario actually poses. That's the thing. Like, yeah, staying engaged with your band is something that is, like, the actual effects of it are things that need to be worried about, right? Like, you looking in another direction at somebody else that you're also close to doesn't take away from the intimacy of the band unless you personally, as the person getting pulled away from that person, feels like it is, right? If it bothers you personally that you are getting distracted by another person, then yeah, absolutely, that does pose an issue. But I mean, if you're like, okay, fuck, this person brought a guest and I'm already pissed off that this person brought a guest. No, now he's making eye contact with the guest when he could be making eye contact with me. Like,
that's not good.
That's a bit overbearing.
Yeah.
That's like somebody else that sees you making eye contact doesn't necessarily have the authority to say, okay, well, I think that you're not engaged just because you made eye contact with this person at a joke I made, right?
Yeah, just catch yourself before it becomes a consistent issue. Because, like, even again, you might neglect some things later on during, like, a important situation because you've normalized. Like, you can't separate the two different worlds. Like, I feel bad that I ignored Jane for extended periods at a lot of shows. But she understands that, like, I'm in a very specific mindset. And that's why she entertains herself. And we have our own separate things, and then occasionally when there's free time, yeah, interaction. But for the most part, yeah, she knows what she signed up for. We were friends for like a year before.
That's the most important thing, is
Yep.
that the people in your circle that you invite around, no matter what, know what they're signing up for, right? That's the biggest thing about it. And also, I'll add, additionally, that you're probably more naturally like a hypervigilant and self-aware person. You're more likely to catch yourself on your shit if you notice these things, like you said, like the symptoms of the problems, right? Like the people that notice that stuff and are able to catch themselves are usually not going to be the problem. It's usually going to be the people that are actually constantly picking up the phone call, that are constantly, even when that person's not there, they're engaged with that person.
If your significant other is calling you at band practice for something that's not an emergency, that's an issue. Just don't.
Set boundaries. Yes.
You know where they're at.
But yes, guest policies are extremely important just for the sake of staying like engaged in any sort of group dynamic. It's as simple as like if you're in class, you're not going to bring friends to class. You're not going to bring other distractions to class. Like that's very socially aware, right? If you're going to work or if you're going to an occupation or somewhere where you have commitments, you're not going to intermingle.
But then they're also bring your kids to work day. That's a thing that jobs have.
That's the thing that you guys have.
Yeah.
With all social Relationships, communication is key.
As long as everyone knows the same thing and you don't jump scare somebody with somebody randomly at practice. Of like, yeah, Todd's going to be here tonight. He's hanging out.
Yeah.
Right.
Not just talking, but communication and understanding of what kind of communication works best for the people you care about.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, and I feel like this is always like, it's always the error of people that are probably in various different ways insecure in their friendships, right? Or insecure in their relationships. And they're in a band and they don't know how to just transparently say, hey, I'm in a band. I'm in this thing. I have this engagement. There are going to be times where we will not talk. There are going to be times when you are not going to be the priority. You have to just like say it. You just have to actually say it, and you have to be very brutal and blunt about it. And the way that that person responds should actually dictate the kind of relationship or situationship that you're going to have with them, right? Like very transparent.
Yeah. There's also a lot of people who they want to come to the band rehearsal because, going to a band's rehearsal, it's going to be wild. Like it's going to be a party. Like, hey, I got 2 bottles of liquor with me. Like, and I got my bag of weed. Like, I'm ready to go. It's like, boss man, bands don't actually turn up that hard.
Well, some do.
We do.
We kind of do.
We sometimes do, but
We're all
it's
addicts.
Yeah. It's that separation of like, yeah, you might pull up to our rehearsal where we're all tired from working in the morning on days we're not supposed to, and we have to be up for an extra thing the next day. And yeah, like, don't expect to pull up and hang out with bands, especially after shows. After shows, the after parties suck. Just gonna let people know. It's a whole lot of laying on the floor. Yeah. Laying on the floor, moving equipment, probably bickering with somebody over something. And then they probably just, if it's like us, want to just watch their video of them playing.
Yeah, there's different dynamics. And the complication, like Ethan said in the last session or last episode, I don't know how these are going to be arranged, but we're not on salary. We don't have an obligation. Our lives will not end if we don't commit ourselves fully to this job. And so there's an incentive. We want to enjoy our time here. So if you've got this close relationship with someone, then yeah, you might want to have them around. And then it's a different situation where people are treating the band as a coming together point for a broader social group, which, I mean, kind of reasonable because that's a large part of the appeal of music is it brings together people in a social situation. That's what concerts are. That's what listening to music on Bluetooth speakers is. Yeah, after the show, unless it's a cocaine band, there are cocaine bands. I respect that.
We're too broke to be a cocaine band.
We're too broke to be a cocaine band. We're a caffeine and sometimes Adderall band. And we're usually tired after shows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and that's the funny thing. I feel like on your last point, like every rehearsal that my partner would insist on going to at the time, afterwards was always just like, yeah, that was so boring. You guys just like, that's just all you do? That was so boring. I thought you guys were going to do so many other things. And I was like, yeah, well, first of all, can't get much work done when you have some fucking weird guys staring at everybody the whole time. And also, yeah, that's just what we do.
Being a musician isn't necessarily fun all the time. Like, it's a lot of standing around talking with each other.
Right. And arguing about things is a lot of what it is, too. And just, like, brainstorming. So
You're not getting a private concert listening in on a rehearsal. You're going to hear the same song or the same section of a song, like, 10 times back to back.
Right.
Especially, like, people think, like, coming to a studio session, like, oh, I'm pulling up to the studio. Did I get to listen into this? No. Studio sessions are boring.
Congratulations, you get to scream the same word for 10 minutes straight.